Hello and welcome to Dot Point PS2, and today we're looking at describing a wide variety of farm business structures from the family farm to corporate enterprise. So there's a number of different farm business structures. We're going to look at combined family and corporate and also cooperatives, but the family farm is the most common one, and then corporate enterprises are the next most common one. So we're going to look at those just now. So first of all, some farm business stats, and you'll notice that these stats I think are out of the textbook, and so these ones are going to be slightly different to the ones that you've seen on the previous dot point worksheet. So depending on where you look, you're going to see different numbers because it depends what year people measured them and what factors they took into account. So you have to take that into account when you're remembering. You just need to remember one of them, not both of them. So there's around about 150,000 farm businesses in agriculture, 350,000 people employed now. The previous sheet said around 230,000 people now, down from 450,000 or so. The point is that the number of people employed on farms is declining, and that means there's less people in country towns. Farms equal 60% of Australian land. So before we said it was about 51 or so, but that depends again who, first of all, what stat you read, what source you use, also what year you're measuring, because it fluctuates year to year. So if you just remember 50 to 60% of Australian land is used for agriculture, that would be good. So the number of family farms are declining, but there's still over 100,000 family farms. So they still make up 90% of farms in Australia. There's just less of them, and they're becoming bigger. So at the same time as being less, they're becoming bigger. And there's still 90% of farms in Australia. Agricultural commodities, this depends on the year as well, but $41 billion roughly per year. That's the farm gate price for all of the agricultural products produced on farm. Farm gate price meaning the price that farmers receive for it. So other agribusinesses that benefit from agriculture include transport, managers, agents, wholesalers, retailers. Remember, the term agribusiness means any person or any business that makes some or all of their income from agriculture. And so despite the declining number of farms in Australia, total farm production per hectare has actually been increasing due to increased efficiency of production. So the increased use of technology, the increased plant breeding, genetic modification, things like that lead to more production. So let's have a look at outlining and then giving positives and negatives of different types of farms. So the family farm is really the key thing here. It's in the dot point. The corporate farm is as well. But the family farm is really important because, as we said, it makes up 90% of farms in Australia. So they're usually owned, or they are always owned by family, which is why it's a family farm, but they're often a third, fourth or fifth generation. So they've been on the farm for a long time, and it holds a significant place in the family's history, being on the farm and often being on the same farm as they have been for a long time. Normally, of course, the family lives on the farm and they're part of the local community. And members of the family will often be involved in running the farm, and it'll often be run by children in the future. So the positives are that the family is heavily invested in the success of the farm, and so therefore it can survive poor conditions pretty well. If worse comes to worse and it's bad years, drought, etc., everyone will kind of have a go at helping out and just helping things along in case there's times of financial hardship. And so it's much more likely to survive than a business that is just for profit, a corporate farm. Also, they have more personal relationships with farm workers and also the local community. In terms of negatives, it's harder for them to access capital or money to invest in new equipment, and they'll often have a very large debt with a bank. So they'll have loans for maybe for their property, for various things that they've invested in, and so that debt, they'll have interest on that debt as well with the bank, which is a significant problem that needs to be managed. If the farm is smaller, it's going to be harder for them to compete on price with larger farms due to the lack of economies of scale. So economies of scale is where larger farms can produce things more cheaply. per unit of production. So basically, if you don't know what that means, you probably should look it up. But smaller farms are going to have a lower economy or a smaller economy of scale. Okay, moving on to, we might move to corporate farms next, and then we can talk about combined corporate and family. So corporate farms, they're usually owned by a company and possibly listed on the stock exchange with shareholders. And so they purely are run for profit, and the decisions are basically made around this profit motive. And there's very little thought about the history of the farm, about the kind of personal relationships, the people that work there. The decisions are all basically made around profit because the people that own it are shareholders somewhere far away. They don't really care about one piece of land or another. Like they don't care whether you keep one piece of land or you look after one piece of land. They only care about profit. So if they'll do anything, pretty much that allows their profit and their investment to go up. So in terms of positives, they usually have easy access to capital to invest in new equipment. So easy access to money to invest in various things, including extra land, which is why corporate farms are very large usually. And so, like I said, they're usually very large and they hence have better economies of scale and they can produce things more cheaply. On the negative, there's less personal relationships, and I think people often prefer to work for family farms rather than corporate farms because they're basically making decisions purely for profit motives. So that is something to consider as well. If we look back at combined family and corporate, basically these are kind of a hybrid between the two, and they're often family farms that have become very large over generations, and they've built up such a significant amount of cash or capital money that they've been able to save and invest in things, and therefore they don't have to rely on banks anymore to borrow money for loans and to invest in new things. They just have the cash available to move into different assets. And so they've usually become very large to be able to compete with corporate farms. Examples that we watched in video, they might also have offices in towns or cities rather than on farms since they've become so large. In terms of positives and negatives, they can compete with large corporate farms because they have a large economy of scale. They're very big, they can produce things more cheaply. And then secondly here, they still have more personal relationships with the employees compared to, say, a corporate farm. And they're also they have a more inherent willingness to succeed. So because the business has been passed down through generations, even though it's very large, they still have a desire to make it survive and go well. In terms of negative, it becomes a very large and complex operation to run when it's of combined family and corporate. Another example I've given you here is cooperative. So usually basically a cooperative is like a group of multiple farmers, usually in the one area, that get together and then they invest in equipment such as processing, marketing, maybe advertising on TV, and they do that together for the same product. So an example is dairy farmers, and dairy farmers started up, I think, on the south coast of New South Wales, and basically there was a whole pile of dairy farmers in the one area, and they decided, let's pool our money, let's go and kind of have shares in dairy farmers. We'll start this what's called a cooperative because they're all cooperating, and let's say we'll own maybe 10% each between 10 farmers, and we'll split the cost of a processing factory because obviously one dairy farm is not going to want to pay for a processing factory, and then they're not going to want to pay for TV advertising. But if they make a large business and work together, they can actually afford those things. An example in beef, which we're doing, is called the Northern Cooperative Meat Company, which is up the north coast of New South Wales. And so they're examples of cooperatives where multiple farmers farming the same thing, usually in the same area, cooperate together, hence cooperative. And so the positives and negatives here, positives are that they're pooling their resources and their capital to invest in new equipment, etc. They can compete against larger companies. And then lastly, farmers share in the profits from that company or that cooperative. And the negatives are they need to agree with the other partners, and therefore they also lose independence. So the HSC question. Now, this is the 2011 question, which I'll skip ahead to here. This question, which we saw in the PS1 dot point, is analyze the structure of the Australian agribusiness sector, including a comparison of the importance of the family farm with other components of this sector for 6 marks. It's quite a large question, and you can see there's a sample answer here, and the sample answer from the marking guide is actually very good for this one, which is why I've just put it in here as an example. But basically, if you look at the on the NESA website and have a look at firstly the marking guide, then the sample answer, and then also notes from the marking center, it will give you an indication of what people wrote for different things. So to get full marks, you needed to be able to describe components of the Australian agribusiness sector and relate the importance of the family farm to other components of the sector. So the sample answer had these things in it, which you'll have a look at in a second. But it included things like 150,000 businesses involved in ag, 350,000 people employed, farms occupying 60% of land in Australia, family farms declining in number but increasing in size, still 100,000 families, ag commodities being $41 billion. Talked about ag benefiting other industries such as transport managers, agents, wholesalers, retailers. Agribusinesses are the lifeblood of rural communities because they buy things like food and fuel. And then lastly, family farm is central to providing raw products for other agribusinesses to process and on-sell. And then lastly, the notes from the marketing center. So the best example or the best answers were able to link the family farm to other agribusinesses. Mid-range answers were able only to link from family farm to corporate only, not to other agribusinesses in the wider community. And then a low answer described family farms but did not understand what agribusiness meant. So in my beginning of my answer here, I've underlined the verb. You need to definitely talk about family farms with other components of the sector. So agribusiness sector, agribusiness means any business that receives some income from ag, example, transport, butcher, banks. And you can see here, like I've already said further up the top, this answer includes all those things, and they also clearly showed what the family farm was and how the importance, that's a key word, you really should use that in here, but the importance of the family farm with other components. So you can see how down here where they mention managers, agents, wholesalers, and retailers and how they benefit from the processing and marketing of the product. So that's really important here. And it says agribusiness companies are often the lifeblood of rural communities, transport, accountants, etc. So this is a really good answer, and you can see why on the marketing scheme here, it does more than outlines components of the agribusiness sector and shows some relationship. It shows like a thorough relationship and relates the importance of the family farm to other components. So it's shown a really good, strong link between the family farm and other agribusinesses, which is what makes it such a good answer here.